couple of weeks ago, the Los Angeles Rams ended up clinching a playoff spot after a very big 41-34 win over the Detroit Lions, and this made them the first team in the NFC to actually qualify for the playoffs, obviously putting them in the number 1 seed. But then when they lost to the Seattle Seahawks the week after, they're now in the 2nd seed. However, they have improved on their 10-7 record from last season, so obviously now, this being an improvement for them, they're going to want to push on further into the playoffs, especially now that they're a top 2 seed in the NFC. And with this playoff position clinched, they will now look to push for another Super Bowl appearance, because remember, they did end up winning the Super Bowl in 2021 against the Cincinnati Bengals. So now going to look at how their regular season has gone so far, they actually have a record of 6-4 against teams with winning records, and the teams that they have defeated are the Houston Texans, the Indianapolis Colts, the Baltimore Ravens, a very impressive 35-7 thumping of the Jacksonville Jaguars, the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. So here you can see that they have actually gone and defeated some of the top teams, not just in the NFC but in the NFL, and especially that big win against the Jacksonville Jaguars, because they're one of the teams who are kind of like on a roll this season. So being able to kind of make a statement out of them is a very, very big thing, and also beating their in-division rivals, the 49ers and the Seahawks, is a very big one as well, because that will be quite a big confidence booster. So now that we go on to the teams that they've lost to, they are the Philadelphia Eagles, both their division rivals, the 49ers and the Seahawks, and then also the Carolina Panthers, which I don't know how much stock people will put into that, because the Panthers have been a bit meh this season so far, but they do technically have a winning record at the time of this video's recording, so I do have to put that down. So again, the teams that they've lost to are actually very good teams. The Philadelphia Eagles, the defending Super Bowl champions, the 49ers and the Seahawks, their division rivals, who do actually have double-digit wins, just like the Los Angeles Rams, so they are like a seriously good team. And when it comes to the Panthers, yes, that is quite a bad loss, and they probably should have won that game, but obviously you're not going to perform brilliantly every single week, so that kind of loss does happen every now and then. So I think another thing to take into consideration for the Los Angeles Rams here is that they have a very, very competitive division. So in the NFC West, they have the Los Angeles Rams, Seattle Seahawks, and the San Francisco 49ers, who all have double-digit wins this season, and they will probably all make the playoffs at that point. So the Rams have had to play these teams twice, and this will be a very good thing for them, because if you're in a competitive division, you're going to be playing multiple games where they're going to be very close games, and obviously in the playoffs, the games are usually going to be closer, and you're also going against better teams. So the Rams are going to have had that kind of in-season experience against these sort of teams. And also, the Rams in 10 of their games this season have gone against these teams with winning records. So these are teams that are used to winning, and they're on a roll and they've got more momentum. Obviously, some winning teams do have more momentum than others, but like we've seen, the Rams have actually gone and beaten a lot of these teams. So they are obviously on very good form themselves, but they're also clashing against these other teams who are also in good form. So those don't just make for good matchups. That's a very, very kind of good practice for the playoffs for the Los Angeles Rams. And another thing that the Rams do have is they have quite a bit of experience on their team. So some of these players include Matthew Stafford, who's played 17 seasons, 3-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, just under 64,000 passing yards and over 400 passing touchdowns in his career. They also have Davante Adams, 12 seasons, 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, 12,633 receiving yards and 117 receiving touchdowns. Then they have Jake McQuaid, a 15-season long snapper. He's also made 2 Pro Bowls. And then on defense, they have Cam Curl at linebacker, 6 seasons, 572 tackles, 5 interceptions, and 18 tackles for loss. So even though they're not like the most experienced roster, they do have some experience kind of waging from 6 seasons to 17 seasons, and not all of these players are obviously those superstar starters that you would expect to find on this team. They do have some of those, but even though a lot of these players aren't those kind of big name flashy players that you would expect, the experience is the experience. These players are going to have seen those superstar players throughout their careers. especially the players who've been here for like a decade plus. And even though they might not be able to contribute all that much on the field, they can help other kind of up-and-coming young players, especially the up-and-coming superstar players, with their experience. So even though they're not all these flashy type of players, the experience will help this team as well, especially going into the playoffs, because that's where all of this kind of previous game experience will come into effect. Because of certain situations when you go against good teams, you have to be on the ball, and there's certain things that you can do to make sure that you don't just crumble under the pressure. And I think that this experience will help the Rams in some areas, but obviously these other teams are going to have that as well. So now I just wanted to look at really the statistical side of this and see kind of where the Rams rank against all the other teams in the league, both team rankings and also the player rankings, so the individual performances. So starting with the team rankings on offense, when it comes to passing, they actually rank third with just over 4,000 passing yards. Obviously, this all coming from Matthew Stafford because he's been playing all the games at quarterback. Then when it comes to rushing, they actually end up being 8th with just under 1,900 rushing yards. And then when it comes to touchdowns, they rank first with a total of 58 touchdowns throughout the entire season. That's obviously passing and rushing touchdowns. So offensively, I do think that they are just sound. They're a very, very good offensive team. Obviously, they have players like Puka Nacua, Matt Stafford, and Davante Adams. So they are obviously going to get touchdowns, and their passing game is basically going to be better than their rushing game. But that doesn't really kind of matter because their passing and rushing is all in the top 10, along with getting the most touchdowns throughout the league so far. Obviously, there are 2 regular season games left, so these could change, and this is where they stand so far. But obviously, they're a top offense in the NFL. That is no question. So now going over to the defensive side of the ball, it's a bit more of a complicated story because with their yards, they rank 22nd with just under 3,600. Then with the points that they give up, they rank 6th with just a smidge under 20 points per game. Then the turnover differential, they're actually in the top 5 because they're 4th with a plus 11 turnover differential. And then when it comes to interceptions, they have 15 interceptions, which puts them 6th. And then when it comes to fumbles, they're 14th with 11 fumbles, well, forced fumbles. And then when it comes to sacks, they rank 9th with 41. So obviously, if you take out the yards, they actually look like a very, very good defensive team. But the biggest problem this team has is they give up a lot of yards, hence why they're 22nd in that. And this kind of blows my mind a bit because if you're just conceding just under 20 points a game, you've got a high turnover differential, you're getting interceptions, fumbles and sacks and making turnovers. It's quite worrying that you're giving up so many yards, and this is one of the things that I think could be their downturn. Yes, they get turnovers, yes, they make plays on defense, but they still give up so many yards. If they were giving up yet less yards, I'd probably say they are one of the main contenders for the Super Bowl. But that one thing you can't do on defense is give up as many yards as they're giving, because then the opposition's offense is staying on the field, and that's keeping your offense off the field, and then you can't really score points through doing that. So once they come up against one of the top teams in the NFC, I do think that this could be one of their downfalls, and you've seen this against teams like the Detroit Lions and also a bit in the Seattle Seahawks game that they lost. Obviously they beat the Lions, but they did concede 34 points and obviously gave up a lot of yards, so I do think that that will be a pretty big problem. So now that we go on to more of the player statistical side of this, we have Matt Stafford, obviously just over 4,000 passing yards, 40, which ranks him third, then 40 passing touchdowns, which ranks him first, and then in QBR, he actually ranks first as well among all the starting QBs. So obviously Matt Stafford putting up an MVP-like year, which a lot of people seem to think he should get. And then when it comes to their running back, Kyren Williams, he's got 1,100 yards, which puts him 8th in the league, and then 10 rushing touchdowns, which also puts him 8th in the league. So obviously he's top 10 in both of these categories. Very good running back, and the Rams basically utilising him, I think, just as well as they could, because obviously they're going to lean onto their passing game, because that's the main part of their game, because you've got Matt Stafford, a future Hall of Fame, who's playing at an MVP level. So when you go to the rushing, you have Puka Nacua, the main guy, who's got just under 1,600 yards, which puts him second in the league, and 11 receiving touchdowns, which does drop him to 8th in that category. However, I do not think that that is such a bad thing, because obviously if he's getting all the receiving touchdowns, then that puts the Rams' offense at a pretty big disadvantage there, because then as soon as you shut out Puka Nacua in that scenario, there's no one else to go to. So Stafford is obviously spreading the ball about among other receivers, which is a very good thing, because then that has to spread the defense out, because then you've got multiple threats on the offensive side of the ball. And now going on to defense, you have Byron Young, an outside linebacker, who's got 11 sacks, which ranks him 9th in the league, which is pretty impressive for an outside linebacker, because obviously it's a lot more difficult for an outside linebacker to get a sack. And then you have Cam Curl, a safety, making 108 tackles, which ranks him 27th in the league. And obviously, when one of your safeties is making the most tackles in your team, that could be a bit worrying, purely because it means that teams are getting down the field more, because obviously the safeties are further back, which means that players have to get further down the field for them to make a tackle. So having a safety make most of the tackles in your team is showing that teams are getting downfield a lot, which obviously we see that with them ranking 22nd in defensive yards. So a bit of a problem there. And then when it comes to interceptions, we have Kobe Durant and Emmanuel Ford, 2 defensive backs, both with 3 interceptions, ranking 17th in the league. So overall here, I think that the Rams have a very, very good offense, and I do think they have a good defense, but the problem is it gives up just too many yards. And obviously, from the stats, you can see that they do have players that can make big plays in these games. However, I do think that one of the big things that will be their undoing is the amount of yards they give up when their defense is on the field. And against teams like the Seattle Seahawks, against just other teams in the league who are going to be in the playoffs, that's going to be a major concern. So I do think that the Rams could make a run at the Super Bowl, but I don't think they will end up making the Super Bowl, if that makes any sense. I do think they'll come undone against one of the other teams in the playoffs. So those are my thoughts on the Rams and them potentially making a deep playoff run or potentially making a Super Bowl run. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think the Rams are geared up to make a Super Bowl run? Do you think they will make the Super Bowl, or do you think that they'll come undone in the playoffs like I think they will? So yeah, thank you for listening to the video, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.